I'm feeling very outnumbered. I'm just going to say that right from the jump because as soon as Matt got here, Matt, there's too many Matts right now. So first of all, I'm outnumbered because there's two Matts to one me. And second, I'm outnumbered because you guys immediately started talking about hockey, and I love sports, but hockey is not one of the sports that I have a special passion for. So I don't really know anything about hockey, and that's where we are. So Matt Hoven, welcome to The Tangent.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad you decided to stick with me anyways, even if I'm a hockey fan. And Matt, I always like meeting Americans who are hockey fans because they're diehards and they can get into it, and they got a real enthusiasm for it. So it's good to be here.
Yeah, there is no doubt that I've been bleeding Ranger blue for as long as I can remember. I might be too enthusiastic about it, and as a matter of fact, that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. So,
as a high school student, he would come into my office and he would ask me to get off the computer. Like if I was typing something, he'd be like, "Hey, can I get on here real quick?" And he'd go to YouTube and he'd pull up Rangers highlights and make me watch Rangers highlights on my own computer in my office.
Nasty. That is nasty.
Yeah, it was rough. It was rough.
It's good.
I mean, I remember you bringing up the Mets after I did that, so
well,
it cut both ways.
We'll come back around to baseball in a second here, but first, Matt Hoven, not Matt Sprazza. Matt, you're from Alberta, Canada, and professor of what is it? Religious education.
Religious
at
education.
The St. Joseph's University in
St.
Alberta.
St. Joseph's College at the University of Alberta. Yeah.
St. Joseph. Okay.
So it's one of these weird Canadian things where we have a public university that hosts a Catholic college at the public university. So
that's an interesting idea.
We do that state versus religion thing a little differently in Canada. So we allow.
Yeah. All right. And you're a native-born Canadian.
So native-born Canadian. Lived
from
here
Canada
all my life. I did study at CUA in Washington D.C. for 4 years. So I and my eldest is an American, so she's born there, and so and then Canadians have a little rough time. We got a little complex being next to Big Brother in the United States, so we got a little chip on our shoulder. So she feels that all the time. How Canadians, just quietly in their own way, giving Americans a hard time. So I'm telling her to stand up for being an American. You don't have to be overly bold, but, call Canadians out. Americans can be good people too.
But does she talk like a Canadian, or is she like, does she have an
like
American accent?
Yeah.
Okay. So you don't know just by looking at her, right? You can't tell.
No, not.
I would like to make a T-shirt that says "Americans can be good people too."
Yeah.
There you go.
That'll be our first merch line.
It would sell well in Canada. It really would.
That's actually our largest desire as a podcast is to be big in Canada.
I mean,
so this is perfect.
You go.
This is perfect.
It's a big country. We're bigger than you. You might have more people, but our landmass is larger than the U.S.
I think that could be one of our great statistics that we make up, Matt. We could come up with something like the #1 Catholic podcast in the Northwest Territories of Canada.
Oh, nice. Draw.
Like just say something like that because nobody's going to check.
No.
Do you know anybody from the Northwest Territories of Canada? No, you don't. You know how I know? Because there's no people there. I don't know much about Canada, but I know
I know at least one person there. Okay.
About 3 square blocks of New York City would be about the population of all the Northwest Territories. Yeah.
Right. Now, Dr. Hoven, so you are an editor for a journal called Theology and Sport, correct?
No, I'm not.
You're not?
No,
wow.
I'm not.
Matt, what are you doing?
Can you tell me about that journal? I don't know about it. I've edited a book before, though. I've co-authored. I've been involved in different editing.
Oh, okay. Maybe I just misunderstood it as a journal.
No idea what he's talking about today.
I would have said yes to be polite. I'm a Canadian, but I didn't want.
Yeah, it's the whole lying thing.
If Dean ever heard this, I'd be making up stuff. I can't lie. So.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, so it was a book. It was actually a test. I was just testing you. Make sure that you are a man of good moral quality. And so I meant the book. Theology and Sport. So how do you end up studying these two things together, because they seem to be, I think on the surface at least, completely distant. You think of like the stereotypes. You got the, and I mean it in the kindest words because I consider myself one. You got the nerds on one side of the room, right? You got the jocks on the other side of the room, And so how do you combine hockey, right? We're going to stick with hockey for the moment, hockey and theology.
Yeah. Well, you sound exactly like my wife. She's like, how did you do that? How did you pull this off? You're and you get to like do sports, and like, there I am for my book. I went to Toronto, and I'm having to do some research in the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto. And
Tough.
And I call her back, and I say, yeah, this is what I did today. And she's like, you're disgusting. Like, how did you do that? What's going on? Yeah. Well, so I'm at a small Catholic college at this massive university campus, secular university. And so we teach all sorts of different tangent courses, if we want to go with the name of the podcast here. And
yes.
And so we thought, well, let's have a course on sport religion. And since I got my doctorate in religious education, and then I've been a longtime sports fan and participant in many ways. So we got into it. Like the name of our book that we came out with a couple years ago is On the Eighth Day, A Catholic Theology of Sport. And that tied in with a sign I saw when I was a kid. So Wayne Gretzky was on the Edmonton Oilers, right? The greatest hockey player ever. And there was a banner that read, on the eighth day, God created Gretzky. And I was about 8 years old, and I looked at it and I thought, no, he really? As a young kid, you think, no, that can't be true. But when you saw what Gretzky did, the passes he made, he set up behind the net, which was a totally different thing that nobody had ever done that quite before. And he just had this almost mystical sense of where other people were and whatnot. So, as a kid, I wondered, maybe he was created on the eighth day. So that's where we get the title of the book, and it's really that we think about sport differently. When we think about Catholics and sport, we can think of, Notre Dame football, maybe Georgetown basketball, or whatever school we want to talk about these days. Mm-hmm. And then we can also, there's quite a bit of work done about witnessing in sport, where you'll have podcasts or magazines, or, after a Super Bowl is won, somebody will witness in the post-game interviews. But what we wanted to do, a couple of colleagues at Creighton University, we wanted to come up with just a more substantive thinking about sport. So yeah, we can witness and we can do sports as Catholic Christians, but what about, let's think more deeply about sport. Not to ruin sport, because we don't want to overanalyze it, and because it's fun.
Right.
It's fun to play, and it gives us energy, and it's just one of the best things to do. But at the same time, why don't we think about that, about fun and play, and also difficult questions about sport? So that's kind of the origins of the work.
I mean, it's interesting because, so coming into this conversation as a massive sports fan, right? My primary thought behind sport always comes from the negative. Like, if I'm just totally honest with you, I am constantly trying to not idolize sports. As opposed to finding the positive elements within it. So let's just dig into that for a second, and then I'm going to have to ask you to help me to not idolize sports after that. But the first step is, right, what are the good elements, right? Like, if I were guessing, I would say it helps you grow virtue. It is an opportunity for community and things like that. But please take the floor.
Yeah, you know what? I think right away those 2 points are some of the biggest ones, right? So we have the idea, when modern sport began, let's say at the end of the 19th century, mid-late 19th century, a lot of it was picked up in U.S. colleges in the U.K. and Canada. So you had football programs and even some ice hockey programs. And so these schools got involved because they did see a value in mentorship and leading young people in sport, and they could use it to foster virtue and character. So there's still a sense of that in sport, of course. And then the coming together of people, school spirit at the time was, it was a way to promote the schools, and we still see that at the March Madness and whatnot. I would think that, Matt, with your idol, if we can address that, I think that the question there is, am I just a consumer of sport? Am I just, taking it in as entertainment, as a way to escape the real world? Or is there a way that I can engage it fully, wholeheartedly, that I actually can live up to Jesus' teaching in the gospel and what that is? So, I think one way that's the most evident way that we see this is in a spirit of play. Now, Catholic philosophers have talked about play for a long time. And in our contemporary society, when it is consumeristic, when it's driven by entertainment, and we're so driven by work. I remember I have family in the New York area, and when I met them, they said, "We're New Yorkers. We work hard and we play hard. It's full on all the time," right? That was their mentality. And in that way, yeah, that's good. But sometimes we work so hard that our play is only an escape. That we're so consumed by our work that play is, I'm just going to watch Netflix, or I'll go to a Rangers games or whatever.
Right.
But what sport, I think, is from a gospel-inspired perspective, what it's calling us to do is to really get into what is play about. Well, when I play just with my kids in the backyard or wherever, there's a sense of freedom. We come to play freely, and we put aside our worries and concerns, and we enter into it in community, in a sense. It's weird though, we enter in freely, but we give up our freedom in that I have to follow the rules. I have to follow the rules of the soccer game we're playing. I give over my freedom and I enter bodily into this. And when we start experiencing that, we start to lose ourselves in play. One of my assignments I give students is to say, find a kid between the ages of 3 and 8 and play with them for an hour and reflect on that. Tell me what that's like based on the readings. And so many of them will come back and say, we played for 2 or 3 hours. We got lost in it. And very often in our society with our phones and we're looking at the time, we don't allow ourselves to get lost. And that's one of the great things about sport is we get lost in it. And if we reflect on these elements within sport, I think it opens up about what's most human in our lives. And of course, anything that's most human is going to reflect Christ.
Do you think that younger people, so when I say younger people, I really mean, I guess it could, so I'm 26, so it could include people in my, generation, but I really mean like preteens and teenagers today. Yeah. Do you think that they have lost the ability to play because they're so sucked into their phones?
Well, there's some research is pointing that way, right? And especially they get sucked in with social media, and maybe there's a sense of play in it, but it's lost.
Is that sense of play in social media the same kind of play that would be involved in strictly speaking, like watching a sport on television, right? Like that's one of the reasons that I tend to be kind of hard on myself for watching as much sports as I do. Because, well, first of all, because I think that I do have that mentality, for better or for worse, of like, get your work done. Like, come on, this isn't productive. I'm a rat race American. So it's not like a productive thing to do. But then at the end of the day, if you end up watching too much television, whatever it may be, although I do think that sports is different than watching, a cartoon. Although I suppose that has its place, right? I don't know. I guess I could just be tough on myself, and maybe in the same way that someone would be if they spent all day on social media. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What I think, like, if I think about me watching a sport, why I do it. Well, if it's on TV, they're probably pretty good athletes. And they've made it that far, and it's amazing what the human body can do and what they've trained themselves to do. And on one level, it's commendable, and you're watching greatness in the moment. It's also it's just amazing, right? It's just amazing. So just to inform our non-hockey people, I think the best player in hockey right now is this guy named Connor McDavid, and he plays here in Edmonton with the Edmonton Oilers. And what makes him incredible is he's so fast. He's so fast, and the way he can stick handle the puck and move around and the things he can do. And he can make the other best players in the league look silly of what he can do. And it's a marvel. So if we record a game and we got a PVR'd and we're watching it, and my son's maybe fast forwarding in a bit, it's bedtime and we really should be in bed. I'm like, okay, I want to watch McDavid shift. I want to see him on the ice because he can do magical things. Something that takes me from the ordinary, mundane in life, where we get wore down, ground down, and sport in a moment can do something amazing. And that's what I love about it, the uncertainty or the comeback. You know, I'll be sucked into a game just to see if a team can come back on them, right?
I think you're onto it there too, because so much of, I don't know, I want to dig into the idea of elevating the mundane, like you said. Yeah. You know, like that to me right now. Now, Father, you've read, is it Joseph Pieper?
Yeah.
The Leisure as the what of culture?
Basis of culture.
That's it.
Basis of culture.
That's the work. Yeah.
I imagine that if I were guessing, right, like that there's an aspect of raising the mundane in that work. You know, in the sense of like, if leisure is the basis of culture, then everything doesn't just remain the same, and everything doesn't just get tired out.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
leisure's like it was just funny because leisure is something you do when you're tired, but can quote unquote be tiring if you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
You know,
when you talk about that spirit of play, right? And that spirit of play, I think, Matt, you're right, that it can get kind of affected by the other stuff that we have. So technology can get in the way sometimes, or just being busy, working too hard, so that play becomes more of an escape from work as opposed to something that's kind of natural in us. But if you look at kids, they'll play naturally. They'll play without anything necessarily being told them. Like, they're making up rules to their games as they play. I was visiting some friends, and their son was kicking a ball around in the house. He probably shouldn't have been kicking the ball around in the house or anything, but he was kicking the ball around in the house.
Come on.
Yeah, exactly. And he kicked it over towards me, and of course I'm a really good example, so I kicked it back to him. And pretty soon he and I were kicking the ball back and forth, and I kicked it like in one little direction towards him, and he said, "No, you're not allowed to do that. That's against the rules." And I said, what rule? And he goes, well, no, because only I'm allowed to kick it over there. I can do that, but you can't. That's because that's my side. And so he had this game going. So I was learning the sport, whatever it was that we were playing. I was learning from him on the fly, and he was making it up, of course, as we went along. So he did something and said, okay, that's 1 point for me. So I did the same thing, and I said, that's 1 point for me. He goes, no, you don't get a point for that, because and he had some like reason. So first of all, he was cheating. This 5-year-old was definitely cheating, and I filed a protest with the league and everything. And we'll adjudicate
VAR
it later,
and whatever.
Yeah, but I think there's that sort of natural sense of play, but it can get damaged by the other stuff going on, the other things that we have happening. But then there's something about watching sports that I think actually revivifies that. So like, you get excited watching. You want to watch McDavid shift.
Yeah.
Let's go see what he's like on the ice. And then that gets something going. Like, I remember as a kid playing baseball in the backyard, and my brother and I would just adopt the persona of whatever our favorite baseball player was.
Yes.
And other times we'd go and we'd go through the entire Mets lineup. So batting first is this guy. So you have to be that guy. I'm going to be this guy. And we'd like argue over where we got to be in the batting lineup so that we could make sure that we were the right player. And my brother's actually really good at baseball. Yeah. I was never good at baseball. So he actually had a shot at stuff, but it was like listening to the baseball game on the radio, watching the game either in person or on TV. It gave us something to play at, to pretend. And then that gave us, okay, now I want to do this. So it inspired us to go and play just like the pros. So I think there's something to watching sports that can actually remind you of what it's like to play.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense, Dr. Hoven?
Yeah, there's that sense of imagination that comes so alive in sport. And then you can be Gary Carter,
or Once Upon a Time of the Expos. I know you're making the Canadian connection.
I know.
There.
Well, I had to make it.
I see what you're doing. I'm okay with it. It doesn't bother me.
Yeah. No, but he was great, right? He won a World Series with the Mets. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, since we brought up baseball here, you've talked a little bit about hockey. So I was just wondering, since baseball is the most Catholic and it's the metaphysically superior sport, do you agree, and why?
No, no, it's not.
Why?
That's that American bias coming in. I'm glad Matt has seen the light. Baseball's great though. You think of Bart Giamatti, the former commissioner of the American League, and then also Yale, president of the university, and he had written a lot about baseball and its movements. It's the timeless game. Now we got a pitch clock. That's a whole other discussion. But
Right.
but with baseball, it's counterclockwise. The players go counterclockwise around the base.
Mm-hmm.
And the numbers, lots of 3s and 4s. He talks about the metaphor of it's home plate, you're at home, and it's the batter's one brother against another brother, or one sister against another sister. And the whole point is to leave home, but to come and return to home.
Yeah.
And the umpire is the parents, right? Mom and dad, calling the game, calling the enforcing the rules. It's and the pace of baseball is marvelous. It's so slow in terms of the breaks in the game. There's always breaks, but when it's go, everything's moving all at once at such power and speed all at once. It's fantastic that way.
I once saw an article. I can't remember what it concluded, but it asked the question that does the existence of bad umpires call into question the existence of the goodness of God? And I just thought it was a great headline, like blaming umpires for this theological question. That's just fantastic,
What was your conclusion?
So I didn't write the article. I remember seeing the
I
headline,
know, but just
it was a long
what do you
time
think?
ago. But it always stands out to me as one of those, like, that was funny. That was a good one.
Yeah, it is
I
funny,
appreciate
but it's
that.
also that's what, whether it be baseball or any sport, there's that sense of human fallibility that comes into play, and we can't deal with that well in sports. So we got video replay, and the technology has changed the game, because when we know it was out at home plate, it's only right that we review the call and get it right. But there's something about the fallibility of the umpires that speaks to life and the unfairness of life. Yeah, just how it is.
Do you think that the analogy of sports to life is just totally? Do you think it's going away because we're trying to introduce so much tech into sports?
That would be the concern. I think that's a lot of people's concern.
That's a really good question. I like
don't
that
think we
idea,
can
Matt.
say, like with the pitch clock, right? So in baseball, what was happening was that games, 50 years ago were taking 2 hours, and a couple of years ago they were taking 3-4 hours in length, and it was so long, right? People didn't want to sit there the whole time. And what you realize is that sports science had influenced the game enough that pitchers knew, if I rest more between a pitch, if I give myself 5 more seconds to concentrate, rest my body, I will be able to throw harder and I'll be more accurate. And so there's less, there's a fear to make mistakes that cause the game to slow down. So they had to introduce a pitch clock. So as much as I don't like time being brought into baseball, I think it was necessary because of the scientific element changing the game.
But even with something like, now I don't know how close they are to it, but my dad and I have talked about how they are potentially going to introduce, I guess, not robotic umpires, but like basically in, a technological, a device to call strikes and balls. And I have no good reason to hate that idea, but I hate that idea. Because, you know what I mean? Because, like, arguably, like, I should be like, oh, it'll be more fair. Great. Now it'll be the right call every time. And, no matter how much I think about it, the thought looms in the back of my head of the Pittsburgh Pirates making it to the World Series, which is in and of itself a dream. And rounding towards home plate from third, sliding in, and then the umpire calling him out, and he was safe. And that's it. World Series lost over the mistake of the umpire. And so, like, I have every reason to want this, but I don't want it feels like an intrusion, I think, is why. It feels like something's been being taken away from me.
Yeah, I think if we see that kind of as three camps, one would be the purists that don't want the technology in, but of course, sport involves technology. You can't avoid it, right? It's and as there's more money in sports, whether it be youth sport, professional sports, the technology just gets better and better. Like a baseball bat, what aluminum baseball bat can do now versus a wooden bat. You know, if you're looking at young kids hitting a ball, they can do so much more. Now, but on the opposite side are those that don't see any limits to the technology, and that's problematic because
they want to cut their arms off, replace it with a robotic arm, throw 115 miles an hour.
And it's just like some of these time machines, like if we think of track and field, they can get it down to the thousandths of a second. But it's actually, there's been studies that show it's not actually that accurate because of just human error and just the placement of where somebody gets a sticker on their hip when they're running or their badge on the front, or where the line is drawn on the finish line. Like, you start to see that when you're getting down to that fine of a measurement, it's an impossibility. It's just not physically possible. But we live under the illusion that it is possible to measure that time. So there needs to be a calling out of it. That there are limits to the technology. We see that, like with NFL, they're just debating back and forth about what should be called, what shouldn't be included in replay, and in every sport, we're trying to figure this out. And there has to be, it's a human element that'll never escape the game, but can we accept it?
Yeah. Well, you can see that also. Then
I do.
In the life
I accept it.
I think we'd see something similar though in the life of the church. What can we do using technology, and how can we use technology the right way without losing something of the incarnational value of the symbols and the things that we do? Like if I go to say mass and I put an iPad on the altar, something's wrong.
I don't like it. I don't like it as a Catholic.
Theoretically, the iPad could have all the stuff that I need for mass, right? It could have it all there, but there's something that's anti-incarnational about just using a screen instead of turning pages, right? There's always something about the printed, written word that's distinct from the word projected on a screen. And, so that use of technology, then like we talk a lot about like, well, could I go to confession over Zoom or something like that? And you realize that there's such an important
component. Don't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's a whole other serious concern.
I would never do that. Never.
But it's more about the idea of like how confession is mediated.
Yeah.
Right. That confession is meant to be this really personal encounter with Christ in the person of the priest, but like with Christ. So what are we really doing there? So I think there's always a lot of room for that discussion about bringing in technology, what can be used and what shouldn't be. But oh man, it can get really difficult. I mean, especially in baseball, I think the robot umpire, Matt, I'm with you. I'm totally against it, just on face value. But then
I'm anti-robot.
Well, I'm also against it because it removes something of the like the relationality between the pitcher and the umpire. That there's a call that maybe is right on the line that a robot has to make a decision, yes or no, strike or ball.
Yeah.
A human umpire can say, in this situation, that pitch, it's a strike.
See, but to counter that, I think what they're going to do, from what I've read, and this is just me, sports fan, this is not Professor Matt talking, but
perfect, yes.
They'll have an earpiece in, so the ump will be making the call. So it won't look any different. They're not going to have a robot behind at least from what I understood in something. The umpire will still be there because the umpire is needed for certain things still. But for the actual calling of balls and strikes, there'll be a little sensor, a note given to them. Yeah.
Would that umpire be able to overrule the robot?
I think in very extreme cases, but not from, they can't. But really, the balls and strikes is probably the easiest thing to call. It's kind of like in tennis, right? Like if the ball is in or out, it's easy to do a quick review. I think with baseball, I don't know. I've kind of, for argument's sake, I think that the home plate, like calling balls and strikes, isn't the worst idea. It's probably the easiest thing to judge, But even there, you can argue where exactly is the strike zone on, on Judge, right? The outfielder with the Yankees versus, I don't know, like Kirk is a catcher that the Blue Jays have, and he's about 5'5", right, or whatever. Totally different strikes. So they'd have to figure that out. Like there are problems to it though.
Yeah.
Man.
Now, what do you think about because we were talking about Gretzky at the very beginning of this episode, and he is famously the great one.
Yeah.
Right? Now, McDavid, because you are the luckiest sports fan in history, you ended up with the next great one.
Loving it. Yeah.
Unbelievable that one franchise got the only two players given the term. but what do you think about the way that sport fans tend to kind of, I mean, at least in this case, right, make messiah figures out of athletes? You know, how should we understand that and interpret it?
You know, when we mentioned McDavid, his nickname is McJesus, right? Or McSavior. People have said that about him.
They really?
Right.
So it's not out of the realm. Of course, just through the grapevine, I've heard he hates the term. That does not want it whatsoever. He does not wear it.
Right.
You know.
That's good.
Yeah. You know, the
one
poor guys,
point to McDavid.
These sports figures, you know, it's weird. You know, we when you meet them, like I used to, when I was a kid, I would be like, wow, you know, I met so-and-so, or I got so-and-so's autograph. And now I just think sometimes that's probably the wealthiest guy I've ever met, you know, like, or the largest salary of anybody I know. Right. Like, just, it's strange. But you're right. We can idolize them. Of course, athletes have moral feelings, and you know, it's just, they have a skill. They can skate fast. They can throw a ball hard. Right. They can shoot a basketball. They have one skill that's above, you know, that thousands of guys have, except they do one thing really well and they get paid millions. It's off. But the idea, it's tough though, because then you do hear athletes that are models of the Christian life, right? That will speak about their faith and about how important it is. And that's a real witness. Of course, when they do that, they're putting their private life out there, and they better live up to that standard. It's, you know, but I do think that athletes are typically, I don't know about falsely critiqued, you know, or unfairly critiqued for expressing like religious tendencies mid-game, you know, home run and you round the bases, and on your way from third to home, boom, pointing up, you know, or I mean, I know that the New York Rangers goalie, right? He's not an Eastern Catholic. He's an Orthodox Christian, and so he'll make the sign of the cross after every game. You know, I don't know if it's after every win. That's
Igor, you should do it after all. But right, but the point is that you know, I think that you see that tendency, and the critique often lofted at them is like, that is crap. You know, you're just doing it. You know, and I don't know how fair it is. It's not really a question, but it brings up where I wanted to go with this point, really, which was Father Bauer. Now, I don't know much about Father Bauer. I did read the back of your book.
Hey, good.
That's a start. Because I saw it. That's a start. Yeah, because I saw it on the
most
website.
Of the books that we talk about on this podcast, Matt.
I don't
Matt
know.
actually
the book,
read the
know?
back of your book is a huge thing. So let's take that for what it's worth.
You know, I read a bunch of the books that we are saying. But the point is, now Father Bauer is this Roman Catholic priest, and I believe it was the Canadian Hockey Hall of Fame?
Just the Hockey Hall of Fame for all of hockey.
Oh, just the Hockey Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, my first question is Father Bauer related to like the Bauer brand for hockey?
Yeah. So in hockey, like Nike and other sports, it's Bauer in hockey. He's related through marriage to that.
Through marriage.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a connection. His brother, who played for the Boston Bruins, married into that family. Yeah. So
Really?
So there is a connection now. Yeah.
That? Okay.
And it was a fun. What were you going to ask, Matt?
Well, what I was going to say is Father Bauer wanted to bring about reforms. It's either he wanted to bring about reforms in the game, or he was trying to anticipate needed reforms.
Yeah.
And I was just curious what those were. So you were kind of on your way.
Yeah.
You were just going to give the explanation.
Good. So the book is called Hockey Priest, figured that would be easy for people to remember. Yeah, my daughter, she's 13 and said, "You can't call a book that, Dad. Those two words don't fit together." Well, they do. They do in this case. So hockey priest. It's so Bauer. He coached a national, like a 20-year-old team, won the national championship. Was a really prominent figure in youth hockey and amateur hockey. And then what he was seeing, though, was that tendencies within the sport towards violence, towards not educating the players, even later on towards skill development without any sense of cultivating who the person was and educating a broader image of the person. So he saw these major problems. So what he did was he formed the first ever national team, and it was players from across the country. This is in the 1960s, and the last team that he was in charge of went to Lake Placid, New York, at the 1980 Olympics.
All right,
the Miracle on Ice for the American team. But what his goal was, what it looked like was he formed a team to represent Canada internationally, and it was more of a clean team. It wasn't as violent. They were trying to focus on fast hockey. They would still check and play rough, but it wasn't nearly as much violence, and they weren't for fighting. But what he ended up doing in doing that, he realized that the system was trending towards like professionalism, corporatization, and he could see that this wasn't really best for kids in hockey, whether in the U.S. or Canada. And so he said, we have to change the system so it builds up young people, right? So it was person-centered, right? And this he based on wasn't, it was based on Jacques Maritain, the philosopher, Catholic philosopher, French philosopher, and his whole idea of the human person and humanizing. Maritain's idea was basically, instead of kind of what's in vogue now, is to think that the way to develop people is to take religion out. So you can focus on the person, develop them. But of course, Maritain and Bauer, they would think that you need religious belief. You need that understanding, that foundation in the transcendent, in God, in order to assume the dignity of each person and to then want their individual gifts to flourish and to come about, because it builds up God's kingdom, right? And it builds up the common good, ultimately builds up the church. So that was his vision. And of course, when you're in sport, it's about winning. And sport should be about winning. But if that's its only goal, that's where it runs into trouble. Or if it's just about money making. So he had this idea of, we need to put young Canadians, young kids who are in sport, and this would apply whether you're looking at Little League baseball in the States or, Pop Warner football, but the idea of what is best for kids, what is best for youth. And he thought, we need coaches to support that. We need these whole systems, because the money and the influence and the greed, it'll just rot sport. It'll ruin sport. And that was that's what he was pushing up against.
So he developed that thought, pushing against money, greed, and everything else influencing sport. How do you think that's turned out now? I mean, I think we see so much in the way of how money gets in the way and how it can corrupt it. So how do we, maybe how do we keep the fight going?
That's right.
What
right.
Bauer was going for, how would we keep that going?
The short answer would be he lost. The short answer, when he died in 1988, you could say he lost. But in the book, you realize the people he influenced who kind of carried on his tradition. Even though he wasn't in the national team anymore, a lot of the values of that continued. And then when you see the problems that sport has today, like for instance, I'm speaking about hockey, but I know Americans are crazy about sports too. So it would be just as bad in professional and youth sports in the U.S. or worse, right? Research is telling us that.
I didn't know.
But the idea of kids as young as 11 being scouted, and agents are trying to sign these kids that are the best players at 11 years of age. It's not happening all the time, but still, if an agent sees a really talented kid, they're trying to do that. It's just like, what is happening here? That makes no sense. The kid should be out there playing and having fun and developing skills and doing things other than hockey or baseball and stuff. Another one was a former player of Bauer. When I spoke with him in an interview, he said he went to a U11 game. So these are 9 and 10-year-olds, and the coaches are double shifting some kids because they want to win the game.
Right.
And that's okay if you got 19-year-olds, but when you've got 9 and 10-year-olds, like, what is this teaching the kids? And it's ruining the sport for a lot of kids. And we need lots of kids in sport because it benefits them, but it keeps things healthy. Like, people are losing sight. And so this former player of Bauer said, that's why Father Bauer imploded, because people lose any sense of reason when they get involved in sport, or it can be thrown out the window, right? Yeah. And parents get sucked into it. If you're, your listeners, I'm sure we got a lot of parents. It's hard. Once you get into it and think, oh, well, we're just going to do this sport and it'll be fine. Well, then, the team says, well, let's go. We're going to travel more on this team and spend more money. Well, now we need a sports psychologist, and now you need the top end equipment. And all of a sudden you're spending a few $1,000s, and you're like, is this necessary? What's happening? Is there any reasonableness anymore?
The insistence of those 9 and 10-year-old coaches, well, coaching the 9 and 10-year-olds, the coaches probably weren't that young.
They were acting like it.
It reminds me of a Vince Lombardi quote, which, I mean, the interesting thing is, like, Vince Lombardi, one of the most successful coaches in football history,
right? Yeah, connection.
And he said, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. And so there is that, like you said, winning is important. You know what I mean? If you're not playing to win, to an extent, I was going to say, why are you playing? Yeah. Although maybe playing is still worth it if you're not playing to win. I'm not sure.
That's it, right? Like, when you play a sport, like, if I'm playing, I'm expecting my opponent to give it their all within the rules of the game, right? And if they don't give a full effort, like this, ever heard the story of Sister Andrea Jager? She was a tennis player in the late 70s and 80s. She became a religious sister with an Episcopalian church in the U.S., but she realized other people wanted it more and it meant more to them. So she started losing. Like, she lost Wimbledon, the Wimbledon final, women's tennis, because she just knew it didn't matter as much to her as others. And that's so we don't want that. Like, when people play sport, they need to give it their all. That's part of the challenge to the individual and to shape their character. Can they do that, right? And you expect that from each other. So absolutely we need that. And with the Vince Lombardi, I think if we sat down with Vince Lombardi, he wouldn't say, like, he didn't mean for people to say it's the only thing, but in the moment of the sport, when your game is going on, it is the only thing. Like, when the whistle blows and you're playing, it should be the only thing. You're that focused, right? You're in that imaginary play world, and you are there. And on one hand, your competitor is I don't know if we should say enemy, but you're opposed to them. But on the other hand, there's a collaborative element because you're agreeing to the same rules. You're accepting the ref's decisions. You've agreed on the ice surface or the length of the baseball field or whatever. These things are agreed upon. So yeah, in that moment, it really is about winning, and I want that, because then when I watch or I play and great things happen, it's like, wow, that was incredible. Right.
Yeah. I think there's a wisdom to it too, because, like, if you're going to compare the athletic pursuit, to the spiritual life, which I'm not being novel in doing it. Paul did it. Yeah. If Paul did it, I can do it. Like, there is wisdom to the idea of winning is the only thing, right? Yeah. Run the race.
Yeah.
Put the fullness of your effort into this particular act. Yeah. Now, in the case of Paul, he meant the eternal salvation of your soul. In the case of Vince Lombardi, he meant, let's go score a touchdown. And, fair enough. Analogies, something similar, a lot more different. but the point is that it stands, and I think that's something that is a lesson that we really can learn from sport, because, I mean, other than the fact that, unfortunately, there are many people, sometimes myself included, to my own dismay, who care more about sport than that eternal race, Yeah. could you imagine if everybody approached the spiritual life the same way they approached the hockey rink or the football field or the baseball field?
Yeah.
Like, what would the church look like if we did that? You know?
Yeah. What would
and what if it's not so much that we're trying to approach the sports that way, but if we tried to cultivate an understanding that there's a spiritual correlation between sports and our relationship with God, like, Dr. Hoven, what would you think about then articulating the ways that sports points us not so much to like, okay, this teaches you good things, but actually like can be used as an analogy for God, for the spiritual life. So we kind of maybe start on the theological side and say we've got to put God first above all things. And so then sports becomes the idol. And there's, I think, plenty to be said about that. Yeah. And plenty of places where, that can be dangerous. Like, how do we deal with youth sports? Like on a practical level, this comes up at every priest meeting I go to. Yeah. It's a complaint that all the sports leagues, whatever the sport is, doesn't matter. They schedule practices on Sunday mornings.
Absolutely.
And so it's killing our people because they're trying to get their kids into sports. They think it's great, but then they're being pulled in the other direction. Well, that's one thing. And I think there's plenty to be said there, but like, what if we also saw that just about every sport points us to something divine? Just about every sport there's something in the way that the sport is played, the way that you interact with your teammates, the way that you do something that actually points us to a spiritual truth, a theological truth.
Yeah. It really does. Like what was coming to my mind was this understanding of courage, just even the virtue of courage, right? Normally we think of courage as the one, some running back that makes some heroic run through the team and scores a touchdown. But that's not really the main meaning of courage. Courage is about endurance, is about digging in your heels, making the great blocks, doing it play after play. That's what courage is. And that we see that in our regular everyday lives. It's not about how glorious it is. Like for me to write a book, it's nice that I get to talk about it now, but it was 8 years of sitting at my desk and going through archival work, and writing and redrafting and throwing things out and all that. But the courage is really the endurance of it.
And I think you see courage in sports in an athlete in a way that we all admire the military hero who goes out and shows tremendous courage in the face of withering enemy fire. You're amazed by that. But then you see an athlete go out and do something, and they're already performing at a level that you can't possibly perform. But they're fighting through an injury, and you're like, hey, my knee hurts sometimes too. And so Willis Reed coming out and just trotting out after halftime, you're like, I could do that. I probably couldn't play like Willis Reed does. Or like Michael Jordan and the flu game. You're like, I've had the flu. I know what that's like. Carrie Strug doing the vault and winning the gold for the American women's gymnastics team, right? Like I can't I'd fall down. I just fall down, but like she fights through that pain.
Yeah, that was incredible.
Like we can see courage there in a way that's really unique.
Yeah. And there's a sense that, sport today acts like medieval moral plays in the past, right? The medievals and in their town center in front of the basilica, they have an open square and they're doing their plays that were teaching different, ideas about morality and to give people some insight, even some catechesis, I guess, at some level. And that's what sport is. In a lot of ways at a basic level that a lot of people are plugged into. You don't have to be a huge fan like Matt to people would know. How are the Yankees doing? Oh, they've had
that was so self-referential of you.
That's right. Yeah. But you have people have a sense of how their sports teams are doing, right? And it's that on that stage where we can talk about what happened and what really matters and what matters in life. And it's in a way that it's opened up to all people, like that, whatever their background, religious background, they open up to it. But it allows a moment for Christians, people of other faiths, to be able to talk about higher ideals or to name them. Like right now, gambling is just skyrocketing in sports, right? It's just like taking over. It's a major source of income at all sports and in a lot of states, then in Canada, many provinces. But the challenge, so you have that, but then how it brings a question about what is the role of gambling in society, right? You can't help it. And the integrity of the sport, how is this changing it? You know, some basketball NBA players are complaining that when they're on the court, people are calling them out on their prop bet that they just lost, right? Because the player didn't get enough triple doubles or didn't get a triple double that game or whatever. So, you know,
Do you
sport
think that
is that
sports
moral
gambling
stake,
is
and I think
ruining
it
it?
means a lot to us. Yep. Sorry.
Do you think that first of all, that I apologize because I interrupted you and you took the time to say you were sorry, and that was just so Canadian.
It just happens naturally. That's it.
Yeah. Oh man, if I were only half as polite, that would be so nice.
I'm loving the New York accents. This is good. I'm loving it. Hopefully you can understand mine. But anyway.
Do you think that sports gambling is ruining sports?
Oh yeah, the way that it's being done now, absolutely.
Well, yeah, you know, it's funny. The early Jesuit priests that came to North America, and they would watch indigenous games like lacrosse. Mm-hmm. They had a serious problem with the gambling. Now, the gambling that they were doing was somehow worked into their, scholars have argued it was worked into their economic system, and that it wasn't actually going to bleed somebody dry like gambling would today, right? Like
right.
Otani, you know, the baseball pitcher was translator, right? Has lost $23 million or something. So that's on a whole other level. Yeah, you know what? It impacts it, right? And money's leading it. Right. I know the leagues are frustrated because they're like, why don't we legalize gambling? Because it's being done anyways. It's being done offshore. So let's do this. And the governments are on it because they get money. But how can't it? I don't see how it won't impact the sport and the integrity of it. It's a real challenge. Yeah. And the sport
makes it a lot less fun to watch on TV because every other commercial is a sports gambling commercial. And it used to be just beer commercials. And I want the beer commercials back.
Clydesdale's out. You know, come on.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then what are sports fans talking about? They're not talking about their teams anymore. They're talking about their prop bets. Somebody came up to me before the Super Bowl. Oh, I made my 3 prop bets about the Super Bowl. And I'm like, I want to talk about Mahomes. You know, I want to talk about the Niners. That's what I want to talk about, their greatness and what they're doing, and not whether, you know, who sings the national anthem, how long it takes, you know? Yeah.
That's got to be the weirdest bet, that you can bet on how long the national anthem will be. I mean, come on.
It just goes on.
But even there's that experiential quality to sports that gets lost when the focus is on, did I win the bet or not? Because you made a bet about something that might or might not happen. And then if that's the entire focus, you're missing the artistry. You're missing the beauty of the game. You're missing what the athlete is doing. You're missing the excitement. There's no emotional connection because it's all a financial connection.
Yes.
So like it's wrong on so many theological levels.
Yeah.
Forget this is going to sound weird, but like forget the morality of it.
Yeah, in a sense,
it's just taking you away from like the purpose of the game. And I think that's a really important piece is if we understand the purpose of sports, you know, so as you do this work in religious education and bringing together faith and sports and recognizing the goodness and the beauty of sports and how sports can be worthwhile, how do you explain to people what the purpose of athletic endeavors really is?
You know, what I think about that is just the local community, right? How does it affect people locally? Yeah. Like when we think about sport or how they affect our schools, our community leagues, these different, that's where, like, to me, that's sport. And some of those people are blessed and work hard and they might climb up to the top. But I think that's the purpose of sport, and that sport is there for our communities, that, you know, it builds up. We talked about community bonds. Like when you think of new immigrants to our countries, sport is a major way that people new to our nations get enculturated, right? That has a major effect. Health benefits. All of these things can't be forgotten. And that I know that professional teams, a lot of them have community development work that they do. Right. They have foundations.
Certainly.
They get it. They know it's not just about making money, right? But it's so hard not to get wrapped up into it that we forget these things. And so it's like, we always got to check that. We always got to be thinking about it. What are we doing? You know, for Father Bauer, that was his question about hockey. He said, people involved in hockey are going to games, going to practices, traveling, and they never think about, why am I even doing this sport? You know, why does hockey matter to me? Why am I engaged in it? Is this good for me? And hopefully it is. And then is it good for my kids? And how can I give my kids a healthy experience of this? And I think there's so much good in sports that it would be foolish as Catholics, as Christians, to throw it away and to think, well, it doesn't matter, it's just sport. You know, Pope Francis has come out really endorsing the importance of sport, just like Pope Benedict and Pope John Paul II. So there's a whole tradition of Catholics in sport. We know the purpose of it, its significance, and we gotta balance that. So maybe Matt's idol, that idol of entertainment, he's got to balance it with that spirit of play, sport as a moral stage, and then, you know, what's the purpose of local community sports in the bigger scheme?
Yeah, and I will say that, you know, all jokes aside, I do think that the key is that I do need to approach, like personally, I need to approach sports with more of a, you know, with the intent of play. You know, like I think that I wish that I could tell you exactly where it came from, you know, but I don't think I'm alone in approaching sport void of that spirit of play, and instead taking it too seriously, or just putting too much stock in it. I don't know. So I do think that that's really important, and I am glad you brought that up at the beginning, because I think I know. I'm pretty much repeating it, but
these are things that I think any person who's trying to live out their faith, it's something they need to ask. Just like in other areas, I had one student. He was excited to take my course because his wife said he should take it, and he loves sport. He's like, perfect, I get to take a theology class and study sport. And his problem was that he realized, I do kind of make sport an idol. Like it gets to be so much. And my wife would probably say, I do that sometimes, right? Like I do it, but how can I balance that? Right. But to me, if we keep it fun and enjoyable, it's still competitive, of course. And it's in some ways, sport is also life-threatening to the athletes. Like it's dangerous. But there's something that fills us with a passion and an energy, you know, like surely when the Rangers hold that Stanley Cup up in 2 months' time, that it's going to happen. His mind's going to explode. It's going to be awesome. Yeah. I'm not saying that the gift of tears will occur. I'm just saying I won't be surprised if it does.
I'm not going to be able to get him off that topic. It's going to come up in every episode that we record. It's going to be every text he sends me is going to have something about the Rangers won, and it's just going to be constant. Like I'm going to have to deal with this.
And he should.
Hey. Yeah. It's been a long time, Matt, so I'm not opposed to
I've never seen it.
Hey, when the Mets finally win a World Series, you're going to hear about it for quite a while.
Yeah.
Heck, 2015 was a rough week for me when the Mets were in the World Series in 2015 because I couldn't sleep. I was watching every game and just devastated emotionally, repeatedly throughout the week. Well, and because they lost, it was brutal.
Well, and then they go out and they sign all these great pitchers, and you're like, they're turning this around, and then they just stunk last year.
Not so much. Yeah, exactly. Not so much a turnaround.
Oh, the life of a fan. Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah. Well, I always tell people, I think that's one of the things that has made me a good Catholic is I grew up a Mets fan. And so I understand how to persevere through adversity.
Penance.
I understand how to do penance, how to deal with this stuff. Like nothing has ever been just handed to me. I know that you've got to work for things. You got to persevere through things. Like these Yankees fans out there are just like, we always win. Isn't it great? You know, and like, so the spiritual life, it's supposed to be easy, right? Just God lavishing grace upon us all the time. There's never dryness in prayer. No, I know what it's like because I grew up a Mets fan.
In prayer.
Like I know what this is like. I understand the desert experience in a different way.
Well, I feel that way about, team sport and cheering for your team. Like my kids, it was like, no, you're not cheering for any team except, the hometown team. I don't care. like, no, you're not getting your allowance this week. We're not, it was like, you're doing this. And so I didn't give them the choice, and they're going to love that team, whatever happens. And I think and maybe there is a good connection to church and Christian life in that way.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Well, all right. Maybe real quick, we can just switch over from the team sports to those individual sports, because there's something there too. I think the team sport teaches you the value of community and the need to work within a system and to support people in the things that they're doing. And so in hockey, everybody's got a role. You've got Wayne Gretzky, but you've also got a couple of enforcers who protect Wayne Gretzky. You've got for every Michael Jordan, there's a Scottie Pippen. And then I think baseball, again, this is why I think baseball is metaphysically superior. In baseball, everybody at some point has to stand on their own. And then at some point, everybody has to provide for the collective, for the whole team. So there's a real beauty in that. But individual sports, it's a very different thing. And I sometimes wonder, like, what's the spiritual analogy with an individual sport? What would you say?
For an individual sport?
Yeah.
Well, I think about tennis. I don't know. I think the analogy, like when I think of track and field, like a track athlete, 200 meters, like just running down the lines, like there's nowhere to hide. It's like you're being blocked out. It's just terrible. I sometimes, it's almost like going to confession, every time. You're just like, it's just laid out there.
I like that.
That's how you perform. There's a whole sports psychology behind it, I think, with the individual sports, in that it's always about competing against yourself. You're not, you're not a tennis player competing. You are against that other player, but you're also, it's just how your game is going. And I think that's the only way you survive it, I think that's the spirituality. Now, there's also a sense of team, like with track. There's a whole team, a track and field team at a college or at a high school. There is that sense of it. But like golf, it really is just out on your own. Like golf, that's another game where you're just competing against yourself and against how many strokes you take. Talk about courage and endurance to just bear through there, to focus through. It's, I don't know, I'm an extrovert. I couldn't have handled, I wouldn't have the focus and the dedication to be an athlete like that. And you got to have nerves of steel too. Like when you're playing a football game, if you're an O-lineman, you know your role and you do that. And most times you won't be the center of attention, and you're fine with that. Your team won. But with those other sports, it's all on you. It's kind of ruthless in that way. How difficult it is. You like the mindset of an individual athlete. That's tough. Yeah.
I guess that's why in the life of the church, we have the saints who are part of religious orders, founded communities. And you also have the desert fathers, the hermits, the monks, the contemplatives,
Yeah. Just they have to do it. They're not all the diocesan priests, right? Right. They're out on their own. But it's, I think with individual sports, it's just, you marvel at it. And they're not usually the big name sports, right? Like it's all team sports that are a bigger deal. I would assume that's in part because of colleges and universities that have made those team sports an integral part of the school spirit. And that's carried on with them through the media to take it. But really, tennis is big, golf. But a lot of those individual sports, it's just at the Olympics is the main event where most of us will.
I was going to say every 4 years we get real excited about
that's
field,
it. Yeah.
That's about it.
That's it. Yeah. All right. Now, to wrap it up, Dr. Hoven, I'm going to ask you the single most important question we've asked you all
right. I'm ready.
And that is, if you had to pick your number one sports moment, what would it be?
My number one sports moment. So
you
far in my life.
Athlete.
Okay. In case somehow I make the Masters when I'm 50 or something.
That's right. Yeah.
My number one sports moment. Oh boy, and because you think of
It could be as a fan or as an athlete.
You think as a spectator, yeah, you think sometimes, I'll tell a more of a personal story. Was that my son's hockey team this year was an assistant coach. We lost every game except for one. So we played like 35 games and we're losing, and we had a tie too. And it was so hard. My role on the coach was on the staff was more as like a mental coach, like to help kids and set goals and stuff. That's what my role was. So we're fairly serious. And it was like, how do you keep your spirits up when you find every way to lose, right? We were just outmatched. And in that last game, after 34 losses and 1 win, the last game of the year, the last game of playoffs, we won the game. And that was just a cool moment. Those kids it was like they'd won the Stanley Cup, the gold medal, everything. They're all, throwing the sticks in the air. They were loving it. Then we went in the change room. And so often after a game, we sat there and tried to keep their spirits up. And the coach got up to say words and said, we won the game. And they just erupted, and we played a song and they danced. And it was just great. It was really that sense of fulfillment. Maybe that's what I love about sports, is that there's a sense of satisfaction that you put all this work in and you don't know what the future holds, but there's, if I can use the word, eschatological reality, that sense of what is promised at the end of our lives in heaven, where there's complete fulfillment. We get a taste of that when we win a championship or we win a big game.
Yeah.
And you just want to sink your teeth into it and savor it. So, but great.
Awesome. That's awesome. I feel like Father's chomping at the bit. He wants to tell his.
Actually, I can't top that. All I could think about is like, this is an awesome story. I'm thinking of like some of my favorite sports moments are going to Mets games and hearing people say really inappropriate things to each other. So
I went to the old Yankee Stadium once. It was July 4th. It was a Saturday against the Red Sox. Roger Clemens was on the mound for the Yankees, who of course played for the Red Sox before that. So, and a fist fight broke out in the first inning. And my Canadian friend and I looked at each other and like, is this going to be safe? Like, what's this game going to be like? It was great. It was great.
That's so good.
Yeah.
I always remember too, like there's games that I was able to be at, like Mets are losing a game. It's at the old Shea Stadium. They're losing. And my buddies and I were at the game and we said, let's just stick it out. People are starting to leave. Now we're going to stay to the very end. Mets won on a Carl Everett walk-off home run. Nice. And it was like the coolest thing. I'd never seen one in person. I'd watched it on TV and all right, this is worth staying for, Or then like the first Mets home game after 9/11, they played the Braves. I hate the Braves. I've hated the Braves for so long. And Mike Piazza hits a home run, and it was like the greatest moment. Like, here it is. We're back in New York. It's after the Towers. He's wearing an FDNY hat, and just the place is going crazy. It was the coolest thing. And you realize, all right, in this time when everything's been really sad and there's this big tragedy, there's some hope. There's something good still out there. And I think sports does that in a general way. It reminds you that there's still some good stuff. And we had here locally, the chaplain of one of our Catholic high schools used to live here at my parish, and he had the girls' soccer team was playing in the state championship, and he was all geared up for it. And the morning of the game, the girl's mother died, and she played in the game.
Wow!
And she won the game for the team. She scored the winning goal as time, like,
incredible.
It was the craziest thing. And it was one of those things where playing in that game meant the world to her. And he said he was watching the girls celebrate on the field, and he couldn't tell why they were crying, because it was all of it. It was the emotion of their friend losing her mother. It was the joy of winning the game. Yeah. It was everything, So these stories, like, sports has the power to do those things for you, to hit an emotional chord.
Father, when you see that story, I just have to interrupt. It reminded me of some research I read about usually in sports psychology, you think of incidents that happen to athletes outside of their sporting world really distract them, break them down. It's not good for performance. But there are those times that, a Canadian figure skater who at the Vancouver Olympics, her mother died of a heart attack between the short, long program or something, and skates the most incredible skate of her life, and she gets a surprise bronze medal. These kind of things. And when we see that some people would say, that's some kind of human greatness, or we might say some kind of transcendent, that there's something about the human spirit that just reaches out for something more, that our life just there's something more there. And of course we speak about God, Trinity, grace. That's where our spirits are longing for that, and they reach out for that. What an incredible story about that girl.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah. No, but the heart longing for something more.
Yeah.
And sports kind of gives us the sense that there is something more. And
there is something. We know it. We know there's something more. Sports tell us that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's why whenever you watch the Olympics, it's not the best competitors necessarily. It's the human interest story part that really grabs you, that makes you want to root for somebody, because you realize there's something more than just how far this person can jump or how fast they can run. You're like, there's so much more to this person. I want them to win for that reason.
Yeah, for that reason. And to see it happen is just, it's incredible. Yeah. It's, it lifts us up, and then we know there's more. We know, what God has in store for us. Yeah.
Well, Matt, thanks so much for giving us your time.
You're
We're going to
welcome.
send people to matthoven.ca.
Oh, wonderful. Great.
Wait. Wrong Matt. Matthoven.ca, not mattsbaraza.ca. That won't get you anywhere. Matthoven.ca. Check out Matt's good work and The Hockey Priest and all his other writing. Matt, thanks so much for making time for us today.
Thanks a lot, guys. This was fun. Thanks.
Thanks for appreciate you.
Enjoy the New York accent.
Thanks for going with the Canadian USA jokes. Loved it.
Okay, take care.
Hey, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to further support The Tangent, please consider subscribing or following on your preferred platform, following us at @thetangent_Catholic on Instagram, or even donating at veritascatholic.com. See you next time. God bless.